Minecraft 1.21.4, the Pale Garden update has added a ton more than just pale oak wood. From creaking secrets to amazing new block functions, here's the 20 best features in it. Covering the ground inside of the Pale Garden biome, we have Pale Moss. This block, surprisingly enough, has great function when it comes to mining. Simply place down one of the Pale Moss blocks and bone meal it. This will convert the surrounding deep slate or stone into Pale Moss as well. And if we do this down here in a deep cave, we're getting rid of the air exposed blocks that are all along the walls of this cave, meaning that there's a really high chance of there being ores underneath these Pale Moss blocks. But unlike the standard moss, Pale Moss can burn, actually making it be the only block that you can plant things on that can also burn. You can see very quickly it's burnt down the whole area around here, and we have actually exposed a diamond, some iron, and even some raw iron. This is truly one of Minecraft's new best mining methods. You've probably heard about the eye flowers that generate inside of the Pale Garden. These interesting closed blossoms are closed during the day, having this gray form, but then when it turns to nighttime, they will all open up and turn into the open eye flower. And the closed and open eye blossoms have a secret use, so you can just plant these down. But if we collect some mushrooms, both red and brown, craft some bowls, now with a bowl both mushroom types and a closed eye blossom, we get a suspicious stew, and this will give us nausea for 7 seconds. However, if we craft this stew with an open eye blossom, it will give us blindness. So let's start with the nausea suspicious stew of the closed eye blossom, now drinking the one that gives us blindness. So if you want to craft either of these suspicious stew types, be sure to use the open and closed eye blossoms. Pale forests and dark forests always generate next to each other. However, the Pale Garden has to be on a higher Y level. You can notice here the lower part of the forest is the dark forest, and the higher part is the Pale Garden. And although parts of the Pale Garden will dip down to be lower, overall the majority of it generates at Y100 or higher. And because of this, it's usually the case that if you have a Pale Garden inside of a dark forest, that's because it generated next to a mountain and especially a grove biome. You see, a grove biome has very similar spawning requirements to the Pale Garden, so if you see one of those and there's a dark forest nearby, you're almost guaranteed for there to be a Pale Garden between them. Being a rather strange method of obtaining it, the way to get the Creaking's resin inside of the game is to punch these creatures, and the particles that go from them over to their tree will make that Creaking heart generate this resin, which you can see on the side of the tree. And although it is very hard to collect it while the Creakings are hitting you, there is some ways to make this a bit easier. So to start, we don't have to manually go and hit these Creakings. Actually, we can have one of our wolves do it. If you notice here, this wolf is hitting the Creaking, and it itself is causing these orange particles to travel from it over to where this resin is being generated. Because of this, we can have that Creaking continue to be hit by our wolf. We collect this resin here, and then we have, with that, a simple automatic resin farm. Earlier, we went to the Pale Garden and collected 4 pale oak saplings. Now, as I'm sure you know, you need 4 saplings to grow one of these trees, as they do resemble the dark oak tree in terms of their growth. However, there's one way in which they do not resemble the dark oak tree, and that's actually the drop rate of their saplings. They're going to generally drop less saplings than it actually took to grow the tree originally. Now, of course, you're often going to get 5 or 6 saplings from that, which is good, but be warned, if you only bring 1 pale oak tree back from the Pale Garden, you may not end up getting enough saplings back to actually regrow that tree. Use items like the Fortune Hoe, as this is one of the only ways to get a large number of these saplings. So Eyeblossoms open and close, and it does this based on what time of day it is. If a certain flower is open, and it thinks that another flower next to it should be open, it'll tell that flower that, and so on and so forth. So it is now midnight, and we can watch that happen in real time. There is an exponential pattern of these eye blossoms opening up when it becomes nighttime. However, the same is also true when they close, and you'll notice these eye blossoms emit gray particles when they close, yet when they open, they emit orange particles. So, although you may not be able to make an infinite field of these flowers in survival, it is an awesome project to make a large one, maybe 100 or 200 eye blossoms in it, and you too can see this great effect in your world of the eye blossoms telling each other to open and close exponentially. Both the humble creaking as well as the aggressive illager mobs can generate inside of the dark forest and pale garden biomes. Because of this, these mobs sometimes have interactions, and Mojang decided to have there be some really cool lore related to this. From the least dangerous like pillagers to even the most dangerous vindicators are all scared of this creaking mob. You see, if we have one of these vindicators get near these creakings, it's going to run away from them. So although we still have danger from the creakings, the vindicators themselves are scared of it. You can see right there. It ran towards us with the axe and ran right away. So if you're having issues with the woodland mansion, a strange method you could potentially use to survive it is actually using the dangerous creaking, although they will not protect you from Vex. So you punch the creaking a lot and collect the resin off of the tree, we get this resin clump item. But to actually make things with it, we need to turn it into the resin brick. This item can smelt directly into the resin brick from being smelted with, let's say, pale oak logs, but the point of these bricks is 4 of them makes the resin bricks block, which you can build with. However, there is an especially interesting variant of this. If you craft these into slabs and then put 2 slabs on top of each other, you get the chiseled resin bricks. You can also do this inside of the stone cutter, and these chiseled resin bricks are very unique. Though we have them next to these chiseled sandstone, which was the first chiseled block to have a face on it, and that legacy is continued with this creaking chiseled resin bricks. Now, the Eyeblossom flowers are one of my favorite flowers in the game, and certainly my favorite new addition to this update. But as well as just being decorative, they actually have some crafting uses beyond those suspicious stews I showed earlier. You see, if you collect some of the closed eye blossoms, and this also has a variant with the open eye blossoms, we can use these for utility, crafting the closed eye blossoms directly into gray dye, a dye that's not always the easiest to get. Then crafting the open eye blossoms into orange dye. Not only is it a cool effect, making the open and closed varieties give us a different color of dye, it also means that we can dye our blocks with dye that was gained right from the pale garden. So something I like thinking about for an example is how we can have, let's say, orange glass or wool, maybe some gray blocks, and they've been dyed right from the eye flowers in the pale garden, making whatever you build there with these dyes even more authentic. The new pale oak wood type has added so many different beautiful variants of wood, and with them being this neutral white color, we can now make everything from picket fences to just great plain walls or secondary colors for our builds, and even providing us with these beautiful doors and trapdoors. However, one of the more underrated things added from the pale oak wood set is the pale oak signs, but also the pale oak hanging signs. Now, when you place down a pale oak sign, what makes it especially nice is that you have that white background, which means that whatever you type is maximally visible. Of course, that also works with this hanging sign, and basically then what you do is whatever your message is, it'll be fully visible. And of course, this also works when we add colors to it. So let's say adding green to this, or red, or blue, even the colors that we add to the sign especially make it more visible and give us a really good way of displaying the text that's on there. From the pillager outpost to the woodland mansion, it seems like the creaking is affecting a lot of illager mobs, and their effects are known all across the world. As an example here, this mansion is nowhere near a pale garden of any type, yet if we're to go and explore this mansion, there's actually a chance of finding resin within it. You see, inside of any of the secret chests with treasure in them, there's a 50% chance for there to be 1 to 2 resin bricks, and a 50% chance, or 44%, of there being 2 to 4 resin clumps. As you can see in this chest, for an example, we have both those bricks and clumps. Now, what does this mean? It of course indicates to us in some way that the Illagers need the creaking resin, or have at least come into contact with them at some point. However, the fact the Illagers are afraid of the creaking makes this resin inside their mansion be even more interesting. The creaking heart attached to pale oak logs is what can spawn the creaking into the game at night. However, if we break the creaking heart, you can see that it doesn't drop anything but a few clumps of resin. And so whenever you go mining throughout the Pale Garden looking for a creaking heart, if you actually find one and try and mine it, it just will not drop. So how do you get this item? Well, of course you can mine it with Silk Touch. However, if you've gone to the Pale Garden already and you don't have Silk Touch, this block can now be crafted. What we start by doing is taking 9 resin clumps and turning them into a block of resin which will power this creaking heart, and putting only 1 log on either side, kind of similar to how you actually power the creaking heart, we can craft this block. We can pretty easily move and place new creakings in our world, so it's always a good idea to collect some resin in this biome. How rare the Eyeblossom flowers are in Minecraft varies a lot depending on which version you play. So in Bedrock Edition, the version I'm in right now, if you even have 1 Eyeblossom, and then you plant it on grass, not the pale moss that it generates on, and you bone meal it, it will spread lots of Eyeblossoms all around it, which effectively makes this an incredibly cheap and easy to get item, being infinitely renewable. So in Java Edition, we can try bone mealing an Eyeblossom, but this doesn't work, as this isn't a function for any of the flowers in Java. No, actually the only way to farm this item, other than just collecting it around the world, is to bone meal the grass that is only in the Pale Garden biome. Now what this means is you can create a somewhat efficient farm for this if you create an automatic bone mealing flower farm. This makes it overall so that the Eyeblossom is just much rarer to get and takes a lot more effort to get than inside of Bedrock. If you've been through the Pale Garden, you might have noticed these interesting growing vines, or sort of strange twisting tendrils, that go on the sides of these pale oak trees, and you might not even be aware from what these come from. Well, actually, what's creating this effect is the small pale moss carpet that is right beneath the tree. And because of this, we can use this awesome effect in many other places than just the Pale Garden. So for an example, let's put it around this tree here. You can see there's these very interesting gray vines that go up the sides of these trees. Now when we place it, there's a random chance for it to go 1 block high or 2, so you may as well just break and replace it till you get it to go 2 blocks high, and this is linked directly to this carpet. So when you break the carpet, these blocks are broken too. And of course you can do this on any block, it does not just have to be wood, creating an awesome overgrown effect all across your Minecraft world. Now resin bricks are not just good for making brick blocks, actually there's a fantastic decorative use for them. You can of course trim your armor using a smithing table and a certain pattern. Let's say we could have a red pattern with redstone or a blue one with lapis. But now we have a new one, which is an orange pattern with resin bricks. That's right, resin bricks are the newest armor trim material. So now if you've been really craving a true orange look for your armor, you no longer have to get a compensation with copper. You can get exactly the bright orange you want with the beautiful new armor trim. You can see even here on the rib armor trim, which tends to make things darker, we have a beautiful and brilliant orange trim on our armor. And I would definitely say that this orange color is actually one of my favorite new colors to use on armor trims. The Pale Garden, there's so many different blocks you need to collect to get everything it offers, and you really don't want to travel 5,000 blocks out many times to get things that you forgot. For a start, you need a sapling of the hanging moss, as you can't grow any more of it without grabbing some. Of course, you also need to grab the pale oak sapling, which comes from the pale oak trees. As well as that, you want a pale moss block, so then you can get moss carpets and moss infinitely. The final thing we need to do is collect a resin block. We can punch the creaking and have the resin collect on its tree, and once we get enough of those, then we can craft a resin block, and then craft a creaking heart with it. And last but not least, if you're in bed Bedrock edition also grab an eye flower, as you can bone meal that for more of them. The pale oak tree and the pale moss burn very easily, but this is not the case for the creaking. Actually, the creaking has an incredible fire resistance, so if we give ourselves fire resistance and let's say try and escape by going into lava, this will not actually help us. As you can see, this dangerous mob will go right into the lava, not even displaying a fire effect similar to, let's say, a strider. So be very careful of the creaking, as fire is not a way to stop it at all, and it can still certainly try and kill you when you're in lava. And actually, when the creaking is not following you, it will also sink below the lava, rising back up when it chases you. Just be aware that their trees are definitely not lava proof, so its heart may end up getting disabled that way anyways. I mentioned earlier how you want to save the pale hanging moss. Even though this item may seem kind of useless, and in some ways it definitely is, however, there are a few great decorative uses for this. The first is actually, if you make an entire wall out of these blocks, you can see that you cannot look through that wall completely, yet you can pass through it. So we can create this interesting effect of, let's say, those curtains you see that you have to pass through to get to a different room. You can make a whole different plant more or less by placing vines down on the sides. Now you do need a block above it that is not the hanging moss to allow you to place this. So for an example, we would have to break this block here to place it on the other side. We really have made a completely different plant inside the game, and yet one with a lot of interesting texture, and then of course with the vines you can climb up it and it is more functional. The creaking itself is not incredibly hard to trap. In fact, it's really easy. All you have to do is break the blocks underneath it, and that creaking is now trapped, unless of course it breaks and generates somewhere else. However, although it's easy to trap the creaking this way, this tall and slender mob that's definitely able to fit in a boat, like let's say an Enderman could, will not actually go inside of it. It completely refuses. You can see if we get this creaking to be near the boat, it just will not go into it. We can make the boat go right next to it, and it still will just not automatically go in it. And this is true for the standard boat as well as the pale boat. Now I like to think it's because the creaking would be horrified with the idea of going into a trap like that made out of the planks of its brethren, but that's just my theory. Either ways, if you want to move creaking, you cannot do that with boats. Mojang decided to prioritize the brick design of the resin brick so much that it's actually spilled over into the nether brick and red nether brick. You see nether brick here next to this resin block, as well as red nether brick, which is crafted with half nether bricks and half nether wart, with nether bricks being smelt netherrack. You can see with all of these blocks next to each other, their textures are incredibly similar to each other, and this was not always the case. Actually, the orientation of the nether brick was changed. There used to be more dark lines in this block, with there being a harsh edge right here, instead of, as you can see, it just goes from this top texture to the bottom one. So the texture was shifted a few blocks over, and they also removed some of the lines. So although it may not be that easy to see, you can see right here, this is a before and after of the texture with and without there being the change. And so now, next time you use either types of bricks, you can see how they've now been changed to work better with each other. Anyways, that is 20 of the best and my favorite features from Minecraft 1.21.4, the Garden Awakens update. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love it if you press the like button, subscribed, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye!